Good morning, or at least it is for me. This is Pastor Rick with Bethel Community Church, and I am for him and for his. And today we are continuing in a discipleship Bible study application teaching we have entitled Win the Day. Now, I just want to make clear this is a discipleship type of Bible study. By that, I mean we are learning skills, we are exploring skills that will help us be a better disciple follower of Jesus. And I just want to make that clear. If you want to grow in the Lord, I am thinking these Bible study series that I put out during the week is a key way to get deeper into the day-to-day walk with Jesus. Some of these things we don't talk about specifically on Sunday mornings in the message because the message has to be broader to a broader audience. So please understand, this series entitled Win the Day is a discipleship Bible study series that can enable anybody to draw closer to the Lord, but even more specifically, those who are currently following him and growing in him. So with that being said, I just want to quickly recap. Last week, we talked about flipping your script. That doesn't mean you flip your lid, okay? We talked about it was, in a nutshell, not allowing your past story or script, if you will, to become your current story or your current script. And we talked about ways to allow and participate with God in redeeming your past into the story he is now working in your present and in your day-to-day, which then, in fact, affects your future. So, flipping your script is an essential habit in being a victorious disciple of Jesus, in growing as a disciple of Jesus, and therefore winning the day, or at least most of them. This week, we are going to spend just one more session in visiting the past, if you will, walking down memory lane, so to speak, just one more time. And this session, we want to focus on how you deal with it in another essential habit that you need to develop. And we are calling this second habit, the first habit was flip the script. This second habit is called, or we're going to call it, kiss the wave. Now, I know that sounds like surfer terminology, but not really. This actually comes from a phrase that a very famous and outstandingly successful evangelist for the kingdom of God coined, and his name was Charles Sturgeon, not surgeon. He wasn't a surgeon, he's a sturgeon. You've probably heard his name. And as he coined this phrase after he had a very terrible experience early on in his ministry. He was about 25. He was quite the phenomena, was getting large crowds at his revivals and his speaking engagements. And he was pastoring, and just a phenomenal preacher, gifted man of God, obedient, sensitive to the Spirit. And he was in this very crowded hall, gathering place, if you will, in England. And during his message, a fire broke out, and a number of people were killed or severely injured. And he was 25 years old, and it just had a devastating effect upon him. He launched into depression. He really struggled to deal with that. And eventually he came to terms with it, quit claiming any blame for it or acknowledging that, these things happen. And he learned to, what he says, kiss the wave. He says this: I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. In other words, the waves are going to come regardless sometimes of what you do or don't do. We're not always responsible for what has occurred in the past. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. But regardless, there are going to be challenges and unexpected things that have hit us in our past. And so it's not so much a question of whether we are responsible for them, but whether we know how to be responsible regarding them and how they impact our future. So learning to kiss the wave of those troubling challenges that you may have today from your past and that may still continue based in your past. Kissing the wave means to face and learn how to deal with them. And it involves two key insights that we're going to focus on today that will help you to develop the habit of learning to kiss the wave of your past. Here's the first important insight, call it a skill, in order to fully develop the habit of kissing the wave. Here it is. You ready? You need to quit seeing the obstacles in your life as the enemy. Now, that's easier said than done. But hear me, you need to quit seeing the obstacles in your life as the enemy. Instead, you need to recognize that the obstacles in your life are actually showing you the way forward. Because how you respond to them will determine the way forward. The obstacles are not the enemy, they're the marker. They're the guiding posts. They're the arrows. And it says to you, this is what you got to do. Are you going to do it right or are you going to do it wrong? The obstacles are not your enemy. Rather, they are giving you opportunity to respond to them rather than just be limited by them. Did you hear that? I want to tell you a story about a guy named Joseph Merrick. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you do not recognize that name. There may be a few that do because you guys are really smart. Joseph was born with a terrible physical deformation, actually several. He had 10 stubs that resembled fingers but weren't. They were like just stubs, not full fingers. And the most pronounced deformation he had from birth was he had this very misshapen head that was just, out of proportion in terms of its size, very large. They said it was about the circumference of a mid-sized man's waist. That's his head. So take your head and look at your waist and hope you're skinny. And that's how big his face was. So very pronounced, very noticeable. So Joseph lived in an era where they had a lot of carnival sideshows. And so the only way for him to survive was to link up with these very willing people to promote him as a freak show. And that's really what it was. And people would pay money to see this freak of nature with their own eyes, kind of a half man, half elephant looking creature. Well, eventually, and he was still a young man. He was a teenager. Can you imagine this? He was found huddled in an alley one day because all he heard was ridicule. All he heard was laughter. All he heard was being made fun of or astonishment and shock at the horror of how this could be a human being. And he was every bit a human being. And this Dr. Trevez ran across him huddled in a corner in an alley. And I'm sorry, this one gets to me. And he took him in. He recognized he had physical problems. He didn't have the cure, but he knew he needed just the opposite of what he was getting. Gave him a place to stay in the clinic, treated what he could treat. And Joseph Merrick lived there for the rest of his life until he was 27 years old. You may know him as the Elephant Man. There was a movie, I think, a while back by that title and probably a book. At the funeral of Joseph Merrick, Dr. Trevez gave a eulogy, and he said this about Joseph. His troubles had ennobled and enabled him. He showed himself to be a gentle, affectionate, and lovable creature, without a grievance and without an unkind word for anyone. I have never heard him complain. Never complain. Are you kidding me? He had every right, but he learned something that we need to learn without near the challenge that he probably had. We need to kiss the wave of our past and not allow it to define our future and how we respond. So instead of seeing our bad past or our circumstance or our misfortune as limiting us, we need to kiss the wave by, first of all, recognizing and not ignoring what's wrong, but moving forward from there instead of staying there and recognizing what is right. And we need to get really good at this, my friends. We always focus on the wrong and don't focus on what is the right and what is right about it. And what is right about your life, despite what your past might be, that's God, my friend. That's God redeeming you. That's God redeeming your sin, redeeming your past, and making you a new creature. It's God's healing. It's his redeeming and transforming work in you. 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 10 says, and these are from Paul, even if I caused you sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it. He sent them a scathing letter about some things that they needed to handle. Though I did regret it, I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. Yet now I am happy, not because you were made sorry, but because your sorrow led you to repentance. For you became sorrowful as God intended, and so were not harmed in any way by us. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. Worldly sorrow is guilt. Worldly sorrow is regret. Worldly sorrow is death if you stay there regarding your past. But godly sorrow enacts you to lean into God more, enables you to do that. And it leads to victory. You know, we need to cultivate that awareness in order to be able to develop a habit of kissing the wave. We need to, instead of complaining, ask God this simple question. What have you come to teach me now? Every time something goes wrong, every time the past stirs up in you again, or you get hit with a trigger, God, what have you come to teach me now? Because he's always teaching us if we are teachable. Psalms 25:4 says, make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Are you teachable? And are you teachable in allowing God to teach you regarding the past so he can show you what's right with the future? Psalms 143:10 says, make me to know your ways, O Lord. There it is again. Teach me your path. There is nothing wrong with asking God to change your circumstances. But remember, get this, my friends. God's primary objective is not just to change your circumstance. It's to change you. So it could be, and I think it often is, the very circumstance that you may be asking God to change and deliver you from, that may also be the very circumstance he is using to change you. consider this. Every testimony starts with a test. Charles Dickens wrote in A Tale of Two Cities. I've read that, I was in high school, had to read it, and it kind of stuck with me. He wrote these famous words, which you've heard often. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I'm thinking, often we want the best of times without the worst of times. And, that's just human nature. But that just does not seem to be the way life works, right? Am I wrong? Joseph Merrick, we just talked about, the Elephant Man, wrote in a poem, "'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you." In other words, I didn't choose this form, but God gave it to me, and God had a reason. I think it was for us. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, "The secret things belong to the Lord and our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of the law." In other words, there are things in our past that we will never know the answer why for. We won't know why a certain thing happened, why somebody disappointed us. We won't know why things just tanked, or why that accident occurred, or that illness came into place, or why your parents were the way they were and hurt you, or whatever the case may be. There are some whys we will not know this side of heaven. Those are secret things that God knows and will reveal as we need it. But what we do know is what we have now. And it belongs to us and our children because they are watching us. We are leaving a legacy so that we may follow the Lord from here on out. There's a mystery, an adventure in how God works the redemption of our past. And we don't always see it fulfilled in our present or even in our future here on this planet. And there's a mystery associated with the whys that will lead us from our past into our new story as we kiss the wave. So that's the first skill, my friends. Quit seeing the obstacle as an enemy. Here's the second important skill or awareness that will help you develop the habit of kissing the wave regarding how you manage your past and moving into the future. Here it is. You ready? You need to identify and address your learned responses, your programming, your conditioning. What are you talking about here, Pastor Rick? I'm talking about things like triggers or assumptions like, here we go again. I've seen this before. It's going to happen again the same way. We're going to tank. These things, these learned responses, the programming that we have allowed ourselves to be given based on our past experiences, good and bad, are powerful. Triggers are powerful. I even have triggers that I deal with all the time. Something somebody will say or something that somebody will do that triggers a bad experience from the past. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And your immediate response, if you just follow the programming, is to go down the same bad paths before. There's another writing of Charles Dickens, great writer, great American writer. It was called Expectations. Don't know if you ever read it. I actually didn't read this in high school. I read it on my own. I do read sometimes. So a number of years ago. In that book, there's a character named Miss Havisham. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. That's how I call it when I read it. And she was a young woman, considered kind of an old maid. She was 25 probably or something. Oh my goodness, she's never going to get married. That wouldn't fly today. But she was engaged to be married to who she thought was the love of her life, and had all this big wedding planned, and all the excitement that is involved with that. And the groom was a no-show. He didn't show up. He ran. Wow. I did a wedding once, and I thought the guy was going to run. He could have ducked out the side door, and I really thought he was going to. He had his hand on the door, and he was really nervous. He didn't. Whew. But the groom was a no-show, and you can imagine the devastation and the hurt that went into this young woman's experience in life. And she allowed that to dictate all the rest of her experiences in life moving forward. She started dressing in nothing but black. And she went around her house and she stopped all the clocks at the time of her wedding in her house. She stopped them. So in essence, she was stopping any activity moving forward, and she allowed that to condition her entire life choices around that one bad experience. Terrible, I admit. And so she was conditioned by her past. So we don't want that. If we're going to kiss the wave, we got to deprogram the bad stuff, the triggers that would always cause us to react and be responsible in the same way. So how do we change the programming? How do we change the learned responses? Well, my friends, the biggest part is drawing near to God and allowing Him to transform your heart and allowing Him to do His new work in your heart. But I'm going to assume that's a given for you. If it isn't, please recognize that you are not the same person that you were BC, before Christ, that you are now after Christ. And He is making all things new. We talked more about that last week. But here's a couple of insights I want to give you on deprogramming your conditioning from the past. I think here's what you got to do. You got to focus on the sufficiency of God's love now, in the present, and for the days ahead. Focus on the sufficiency of God's love for you now. Focus not on the reality of what happened in the past, but focus on the reality of God's faithfulness and His hope that He provides for your new life with Him. When you are let down by someone, when you are disappointed, when you are hurt by someone, it does not mean, my friends, that such is the case with all others you know and are surrounded with. And just because that happened with one person, it does not mean that such is the case by any means with the God who loves you more deeply than you will ever know. Learning to depend on the sufficiency of God's love is, in effect, learning to not depend on the imperfect sufficiency of someone else's love. And my friends, if you depend upon the approval and the constant ability to not disappoint you from someone else, their steadfast love, at some point you're going to be disappointed. But God's love will never disappoint you. Focus on that sufficiency, because if you focus on any other love, it will always be far less than God's. Psalms 91:4 says, He will cover you with His pinions, and under His pinions are like an eagle's claws, and under His wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and bulwark. And my friends, focus on His faithfulness today, not on the disappointments of the past. Thessalonians 3:3 says, The Lord is faithful, who will establish you and guard you from the evil one. Got that? Focus on God's sufficiency rather than the insufficiency of the past. Here's another one. This is going to sound weird. I say a lot of things that sound weird. Release the scar. Hey, What are you talking about, Pastor Rick? Have you ever had a torn muscle or some other what I would call a mechanical injury, a sprain, something like that, a cut, maybe more like a cut or a laceration? Well, one of the techniques to help the healing of those things is often what we don't think of: massage. Hey, who doesn't like massage, right? Massage is one technique of enabling the body to release the scar, is the term I've come across. And what that means is it enables to relax the other muscles and tissue surrounding the actual wound so that there can be a release of the body's attempt to tighten things up and allow continued healing by not fighting the tension still imposed by the scarred tissue. Does that make sense? I know they use it in the NFL. I know they used it recently on Joe Burrow, and hey, that matters to me. Hey, they're winning, by the way. Did I say that? Bengals are winning? There is a God. Okay. May not continue, but focus on the present sufficiency. Okay. So, my friends, when it comes to your past, you need to release the scars of your past, which are like unhealed hurts, learned responses, programmed responses. You need to learn to release those scars so that God can continue the healing and move forward with your healing into this day and the days ahead. Here's another one I think is important. I really do. If you want to kiss the wave and redeem the past, you need to start dreaming again. One of our learned responses from past failures is that we just give up. We don't think anything's possible. We didn't achieve that goal. We didn't achieve that dream, and therefore we're going to give up. My friend, it's time to start dreaming again. Quit worrying about getting out of COVID or getting past that relationship that's been damaged, or the previous marriage, or whatever that scar is. Start dreaming again and imagining again. Oh, my friends, we need that so much. We need that as a church. We need to start getting a dream from God again and just being all in on it. And you need that, I'm sure, and I do too, as a person. Start dreaming again. Quit assuming that the past is just going to continue. There's opportunity there if we kiss the wave. And here's another insight for what it's worth from Pastor Rick. Identify the coping mechanisms that you are using now and see which ones are constructive and which ones are destructive, because they can be both. Coping mechanisms. For some of us, an example of destructive coping mechanisms might be some addiction you fall back on. Alcohol, smoking, drugs, whatever. A gnarly attitude, withdrawal. So how you cope is you just disappear and escape from people and being invested in other people's lives, or even taking risk. Maybe your coping mechanism for dealing with the past is pleasure. I'm going to be about me now, and I'm going to get all the pleasure I can. Maybe your coping mechanism is, hey, I just need to escape a lot from reality. Just get away and just not be around others or associated in any way with things that challenge me. Maybe your coping mechanism is anger. Maybe it's rage. Maybe it's blame. It's everybody else's fault. Or maybe it's chocolate. Not all coping mechanisms are destructive, okay? I want to share this story with you. We'll kind of close with this. And you're saying, thank goodness, Pastor Rick. The New York Jets in 2010 were coached by not one of my favorite coaches, Rex Ryan, but he had a really strong team that year. They were, seen as contenders to possibly go to the Super Bowl. And he had brought in some high talent and some fancy schemes, his famous defense, all that stuff. And so they were playing the New England Patriots in a regular season game in 2010, and they got stomped. I mean, New England cleaned their clock, right? And so, and they were building that as a big game. It was a Monday night football game, I'm pretty sure. And I think I watched it. And I was kind of rooting for them because I'm not necessarily a New England Patriots fan. But anyway, they lost, and the players were downtrodden. And this was cool, what Rex Ryan did. He says, wait a minute. He sent out all the media and all that. He said, get out of here. And they didn't leave the locker room that night. And he retrieved the ball that was last year used in the game. And they went to some obscure corner of the stadium where there was still dirt, because now they have so much AstroTurf. And he had the groundskeeper guy stay, and he said, I want you, and he brought all his football players there. And he told the groundskeeper guy, I want you to dig a hole that we can bury this football in. And he told his players, this football represents the game we just played. And he says, we can't do anything about that. But we're going to play more games in the days ahead. And we will play these guys again in the days ahead. And we're going to take this football from this game, and we're going to bury it. And we're going to bury it as far as I can get this guy to dig the hole. And we're going to cover it up. And then he had a little funeral. And in the funeral, he gave a eulogy right on the spot of what they learned from that game and how this would not define their future. Sorry, I get choked up about stuff like that. And yeah, they played the New England Patriots 6 weeks later in a playoff game and flipped the script because they kissed the wave. They stomped them. And which game was more important, the regular season or the playoff game? Let me just ask you this real quick. How are you dealing with your past as you live in your present reality today? Are you allowing your past to continue to dictate your present and therefore your future as well? Or are you kissing the wave like we've been talking about? Are you kissing that wave and owning it so that it can be redeemed? So God can redeem what he can redeem, and he can use you to redeem what you can redeem. And you're kissing that wave, are you? Because it'll lead you all the way home. I hope these words help as you strive to continue growing in your walk of faith and trust and obedience with Jesus Christ. I am Pastor Rick. I am with Bethel Community Church, and I am for him and for his, and that's you. May God bless you.